How's it going, everyone? It's Handleless TML back with another Cyberpunk 2077 video, but a different video from what I usually do. More information at the end of the video, but going forward the channel will be making some changes, and you'll be seeing a lot more content like this covering a variety of topics, not just Cyberpunk 2077. Don't worry, I'll still be posting Cyberpunk 2077 content, but there'll be a little bit more mixed in between. Without further ado, let's hop into my take of Cyberpunk 2077. Alright, I figure I'll start with something I have a bit of praise for, despite the shortcomings. Now, I wouldn't call myself a diehard fan of the cyberpunk genre, but I love the setting and tone of works such as Blade Runner, Ghost in a Shell, Johnny Mnemonic, the list goes on. These stories are often set in dystopian futures where corporations have become far more powerful and classism plays a deeper role in society. Despite technology and science advancing so far, poverty and violence has often skyrocketed in these worlds. The world of Cyberpunk 2077, for the most part, is no exception to this. I think the overall look of the world, technology, and how we may use it in the future is well realized in Night City. The elements of corporate colonialism and its ramifications run deep within the environments you explore throughout the game. Though the map itself was created by CD Projekt Red, much of what we see is the brainchild of series creator Mike Pondsmith, who created Cyberpunk 13 and Cyberpunk Red, the tabletop RPG titles that part of Cyberpunk 2077's plot is actually a continuation of. I mentioned the TRPGs because a huge part of what drew me into the world was the lore, specifically what I've read so far throughout the source books of the game. According to Pondsmith himself, he studied a ton of economics, history, political theory, and military science before and while creating this world, and you can see a lot of his vision reflected in the map. And while what I've read so far in the source books isn't 100% represented in Cyberpunk 2077, I think it still does a nice job of portraying the world I imagine, and even expanding upon it. The game does a good job at convincing me that a world like this could very well exist. A world where maybe we do run out of places to store our trash, or where working for a corporation can mean quite literally signing over your rights. Even without signing anything, corporations can snatch you up and do whatever they want with you. And the corpos are just one element of danger in Night City. Gangs run rampant, the police can feel more or less like gangs themselves. I had a lot of moments in the game where I considered how it parallels much of what we already see in our world, but with decades of technological advancements added into the mix. A seemingly natural progression of our world if certain elements continue to go on unchecked. A dark future, as it's described by Pondsmith. So when it comes to presentation, I think the towering skyscrapers and the fading quality of life as you go into some of the lower sections or outskirts of Night City do well to immerse me. Even getting out into the Badlands feels like a nice change of pace from the noisiness and mayhem of the city. But it's not a perfect fantasy, and just as easily as the game immerses me, there are plenty of times where it snaps me right back out of it. There are parts of the map that, when observed for long enough, appear to be unfinished or in my opinion oddly placed. By now, most people watching videos on this game are aware of the absolute mess of a development this game went through with important members of the team leaving at various stages, management being said to have left developers in the dark, or just outright being overambitious in an effort to appease majority shareholders. A long track record of showcasing aspects of the game that rightfully left many expecting a different experience upon release and even betraying the trust of thousands by releasing the game on systems that it clearly wasn't well optimized for. More PR stunts ensued, and source codes were stolen and sold on the black market for millions, the list goes on. But in a nutshell, this game is not finished and parts of the map show for it. Much of my content, and the content of many other creators, has explored some of the unfinished sections of the map that are easily accessible even without mods. Some links are in the description, but after 2 months of playing this game almost every day since its release, it's become impossible to pretend that the amount of invisible street lights, floating objects, randomly stopping cars, stairs that lead to nowhere, doors that go nowhere, and just overall basic AI in most aspects doesn't dampen the experience. It's not exactly game-breaking most of the time, but it's hard to ignore cars driving directly into a railing one by one because they're programmed to do so. Almost every moving vehicle besides the one you're driving is driving on a scripted path that they cannot break away from, sort of like a train on a track. I'm positive CDPR had their reasons for going with this design choice, but from what I've read across various forums, many would prefer something more akin to GTA 5 where the AI has more emphasis placed on the eye. But besides driving, walking and parkouring through various points of the map, such as Kabuki or Japantown, can make it for a thrilling experience. I find myself opting to travel on foot instead of by car or fast traveling if the destination is close enough. Much of the game's map, even the areas that are clearly not meant to be accessed, can be easily accessed just by jumping in the right places. Add in a perk that prevents you from being knocked down by enemies and barbed wire, and you're pretty much limitless in what ledges you can climb, so long as you can reach them. You can find some pretty ugly sides of the map, like unfinished sections of Pacifica, but honestly, being able to travel to parts of the map like this proved to be pretty entertaining to me, though slightly disappointing. How much we're able to reach on foot and the amount of vertical landscapes in the map left me wishing some of the considered features like wall running and climbing with mantis blades were included. But exploring the map as is, I can see how skills like those may have been a problem, especially with the strained development. I could easily go on for an hour about the numerous bugs and glitches I've discovered on my own in this game, but I'm sure most of you have heard it all by now. Despite all of this, I think it's possible to get a good chunk of enjoyable gameplay out of this game. I'm nearly 300 hours in, according to GOG, but I know for a fact I've played much longer. A lot of this has been due to me making content for the game, but I'd say about 60% of that time has been spent simply enjoying the game, exploring the map, and trying to perfect my craft in photo mode, which alone had to have added double-digit hours to my gameplay time. Parts of this video were even created in photo mode. Needless to say, I'm a big fan of it. Another area I can give the game praise in is its character design, and depending on your hardware, even the models themselves. I've made several videos showcasing the character models and their details. Many of the models, in my opinion, are absolutely stunning and encapsulate what I feel a Cyberpunk-esque future would look like. Everything down from the clothing, hair, body mod, and even some of the robotic NPCs look great to me. In the right environments and with a few edits, you can really make a character or scene appear almost lifelike to the untrained eye. My only real complaints when it comes to NPCs are how, much like the vehicle AI, they can be fairly lifeless. I say can be because certain NPCs like shop owners, fixers, and quest-related characters tend to have a fair bit to say, often giving you more info about themselves or more lore tidbits. Even some of the enemies standing around certain areas or scattered around during quests are worthy of mention, as you can often witness unique conversations in many of the jobs you do. There's also various scripted conversations between NPCs throughout the map that can often consist of banter, some more insight on the world, but rarely a conversation you can take part in. I thought many of these were pretty cool as they made the world feel a little bit more alive. As for the rest of the NPCs, the more lifeless ones, for the most part, they seem to just say one line, and any further interaction will result in a question mark. Nothing major, but it often left me wishing there was more for them to do, or rather, more that they could do. I appreciate the attempt at realism by making some of the areas packed with people, but personally, I'd give some of it up for more lifelike NPCs. But I feel I've made my point on how Cyberpunk looks. Let's move on to how it feels. Now, you may have noticed I've mentioned little of the RPG elements in this game, but on GOG, this game is still labeled as an RPG. Frankly, it doesn't always feel that way. In fact, I would say most dialogue options only offer extra dialogue, which I did enjoy because I'm very much into the lore. It's a far cry from what you'd find in other open-world RPGs like Skyrim or Fallout New Vegas. The promotional trailers and gameplay gave me the impression that my decisions would have more of an impact on the world around me, but from what I can tell, the maps and NPCs remain largely the same no matter what you do. No matter what life path you choose, you will always end up being V the merc who wants to be a Night City legend. While it does feel similar to your modern day RPG, even a step up in some regards, I think the game really drops the ball on the whole your Night City, your rules concept. Off the top of my head, I can only remember several times where a decision I made actually affected a future quest line, and while that isn't all that makes an RPG, it still left me wishing there were more quests like this. Outside of main and side jobs, which often offer a bit of depth, other quests like Fixer and NPC jobs usually involve V running into hostile areas either to steal something or hack a laptop or take out a single target. These can be fun, but having played so many other games that scatter similar quests around the map, it got stale pretty fast and I found myself with little to do besides them after completing all the main and side jobs. Some of these do have some interesting backstories if you take the time out to read into them, but it only serves to explain why I'm doing what I'm doing. But what I'm doing isn't really changed, is very rarely unique from what I do for other fixers. Now I know that sounds like a complaint, but believe it or not, I'm actually pretty satisfied with the game as an action shooter. Now, combat in Cyberpunk 2077 is nothing spectacular, but I actually enjoy it. It's satisfying enough, and it can be fast-paced in certain scenarios. The flow of battle always feels like it's in my control. Quick hacking is one of my favorite methods of combat, but it can feel a little cheap when you take out an entire building of enemies from one room. Even certain cyberware like the tranquilizer missiles can end battles instantly, even more so when enhanced by perks. I'm a pretty casual gamer, so I will say the perk system is one of the largest I've seen in an open world game. It was a little jarring at first, but after a couple of playthroughs, I became pretty acquainted with it. The perks, for the most part, complement your stats and your choice of combat weapons. Combat options are divided between guns, blunt melee weapons, blades, explosives, cyberware, quick hacks, and your bare fist. There are also perks that help you with hacking and crafting slowly becoming one of my favorite skills to invest in once I realized you could upgrade most weapons and armor to legendary. I could be wrong about this, but it seems some of the items I found through this skill tree were only accessible through that skill tree, so I thought that was pretty cool as it incentivized you to utilize the skill tree. But customizing my character's stats and perks and ultimately deciding what kind of character I would be before starting the game was probably what felt most like playing an RPG to me. I would include clothing as well, but most of the game I played in first person, so clothing didn't really matter to me personally unless I was in photo mode. I was a little disappointed that V couldn't get more cyberware enhancements like some of the other characters you see in the game, but when it came to clothing, for the most part, I just ended up wearing whatever had the biggest numbers. The map is gorgeous, but once you've wrapped up your chosen ending, there's very little reason to go back unless you're like me and, like to do a second playthrough just to get a better understanding of the story. But I'm sure there are other reasons. All in all, I would say the gameplay is satisfying enough to merit a playthrough or two, but it's not like GTA 5 where the vehicles alone are all it takes for me to hop back into online for a couple of hours. In my opinion, Cyberpunk's replay value comes mainly from its storylines and characters. Where the bugs and glitches can be a big distraction, I think the story, or rather stories found within the game, shine brightly. The hallmark of a decent story to me is when I find myself genuinely excited to see what happens next, and that happened pretty often with this game. It's probably not a popular opinion, but I actually find the main quest line to be my favorite. If I had a favorite side quest, I'd say Off the Leash and Dream On. One being a quest where you help Johnny's friend carry Uridine on a series of pretty awesome quests, while Dream On follows mayoral candidate Jefferson Perez and some of the greater forces at play in Night City. What seems to be a small quest actually holds some pretty heavy implications for the future of Night City. At least that's what my interpretation was. Now when I say I like the main quest, I am in no way saying it's perfect. It does have its low points, mostly in the beginning. Many people are not a big fan of the prologue and how it condenses 6 months of exposition into one cutscene. I am one of those people. I probably wouldn't be as disappointed in that scene if Jackie Wells didn't mean so much to V, which is shown several times throughout the game. I mean, sorry if I rant a little bit here, but when you leave a dead person a voicemail, it usually means you care about them, and I have no clue how V and Jackie got that close. At least with Corpo V, Jackie was already a good friend. And just a side note, I think Corpo V is the best V because they had the most interesting dialogue options when going through the main quest. But with Nomad and Street Kid V, you meet Jackie while doing jobs, and then bam, he's borrowing your car. It's a little jarring, but once I got over Jackie, the rest of the main quests were pretty solid to me and quite compelling when I streamlined it. But the pacing was a bit off for me in some areas, especially when it came to Johnny Silverhand. Now, I actually think Keanu Reeves did a great job as Johnny Silverhand, but the relationship between V and Johnny was kind of a roller coaster for me. See, V and Johnny start out on a pretty bad note. Johnny tries to kill V before he eventually just stops. Now from this point of the game, I think CDPR should have blocked off certain quests, because if you decide not to continue the main quest and explore the Night City that's just been opened up to you, you may run into some areas that trigger interactions with Johnny. Off the top of my head, I'd say most of these interactions are actually pretty wholesome, so it can be a little strange to have just had a bad interaction with Johnny just to go across town and have a couple of wholesome interactions with Johnny just to hop back into the main story and suddenly V and Johnny hate each other again. I recognize that as probably because I'm technically playing out of sequence, but the game allows for it and even promotes it with quests like Don't Lose Your Mind, which is a quest that seems to be designed to get you familiar with the map, since it's given to you almost immediately after meeting Johnny. I think the V and Johnny pacing would have seemed more natural had certain interactions been cut off until after you talk to Johnny at the diner. At least by that point, they're familiar with each other. This is probably my only real complaint about the main quest, and it's not even a big one. It's perfectly avoidable so long as you don't do too much adventuring early on, but it can be a little confusing on a first playthrough, especially when you learn the secret ending is only unlocked by picking specific lines of dialogue that are heavily based on how you feel about Johnny at that moment, and it's pretty easy to miss out on. As for the rest of the main quests, I won't spoil much more, but I think it handles the pacing better when it comes to other characters. I feel like I had a proper introduction to characters like Judy, Evelyn, Panam, Takemura, Saul, the list goes on. Then there's optional side characters you can meet like Carrie Uridine and River Ward, two characters who I found myself wanting nothing but good things for after spending some time with them. I would dare say this game has questlines that are on par with that of Fallout New Vegas, which is one of my most favorite 3D Fallout games. Even the endings are pretty interesting, save for the easy way out. It's dramatic, sure, but it just doesn't seem like something V would do. Something else I like is that most of the endings don't give V a definitive farewell, and one even has V starting their next heist with a mysterious character from the Dream On quest I mentioned earlier. I see a lot of people mentioning how the ending left them feeling empty, and I believe this was intentional as many of the endings imply V's story is not over. My personal hope is that more will be covered in DLC, and I'm pretty sure it will be. That being said, hopefully along with patches, the DLC will expand upon the story a bit more. I'd actually love to see that. Moving on to something that I have nothing but praise for, let's talk about the music. Now this part is going to be very short, because my only complaint about the music is that I refuse to do Maelstrom and Tiger Claw missions in stealth because that battle music is just so good. My neighbors hear chipping and blasting from my room at least 3 times a week. Seriously, this game's soundtrack may just be a 10 out of 10, but that's just my opinion. I think some of the music fits the atmosphere perfectly. One memory that sticks out is playing The Rescue for the first time and turning my speakers all the way up to hear the Scavengers theme. If this game does anything right, it's set the mood with its music. It's a subtle tune, but Tower Lockdown is a pretty powerful theme when you're in the presence of Saburo or Hanako. And there's so many other points of the game like this where the music absolutely grips me and entrances me in the moment. And to be absolutely honest, I really don't have much more I can say on the music. And I guess there's really not much more that I can say on the game. If I had to wrap it up and summarize it, I'd say it's a pretty good game. I've certainly gotten my enjoyment out of it. I still enjoy playing it. Like I said before, I'm a pretty big fan of the main quest. I think I'll be playing through it again. I do still plan on making videos about it, but it's really hard to ignore some of the faults in it, and it can dampen the experience. And to be honest, I feel like if I weren't making content for the game, I would have probably put it down a while ago. I'm really hoping one day that the game, or possibly a sequel of the game, reaches the levels the developers strove for. And the music again reminds me of the character models and some of the landscapes. You just see so much detail in the game, but it clearly just wasn't given enough time to become what it was truly set out to be. It's been a couple of months and many have cooled down, but the disdain is still strong for the game, and for many I'd say it's well deserved. I had the luck of only knowing this game existed for a week before release, so it was easier to take all of this in stride, but there are people out there, some of you even, who have been waiting for this for 8 years. And I can tell you after all of this time that Cyberpunk 2077 is not a game worth waiting 8 years for. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a thumbs up and subscribe for more content. I cover topics from video games, movies, music, and even TV shows. Until then, thank you all for watching. See you next time. This is more of just a quick word for my subscribers who have already been here, most of which who have subscribed for the Cyberpunk content. I will still continue with the Cyberpunk content, but there's only admittedly so much that I can make content on with the game. Even some of the channels that have inspired me to make Cyberpunk content are starting to shift over into other types of content. But don't worry, I'll still be making Cyberpunk content, but for now I think it's probably best for my channel to spread its wings and maybe diversify itself just a bit more. With that being said, I want to thank everyone who has supported me so far. If it's something that you feel you need to unsubscribe for, I completely understand. I wouldn't even blame you. But for those who don't, thank you again, and I'll see you next time.